4 p.m., 1575 South Fort Harrison in Clearwater. Dine today at the Three Oaks Cafe.
Say again.
Hey, how you doing, buddy? This here's Carl from Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm here talking on my CB.
On the CB yet?
Yeah, Breaker 190. Did you ever drive an 18-wheeler?
No.
You never drove an 18-wheeler?
No way.
Oh, boy.
You got to have a special license to drive an 18-wheeler.
I know that your license is playing big band music on the Buddy Verdi Show.
That's the Buddy Verdi Show. Big band music every Saturday afternoon from 1 until 3 here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Good buddy.
From the Sunshine State, this is Tampa Bay's Tan Talk.
Welcome to Pull No Punches Radio, the radio show by the fighters for the fighters. Pull No Punches Radio is powered by Enlisted 9 Fight Company and is hosted by UFC lightweight and Ultimate Fighter Season 16 winner Colton Smith, the outspoken and controversial Jay Pagliaro, and Staff Sergeant Dan O'Brien. Now it is time for the one and only Pull No Punches Radio featuring Jay, Colton, and Dan.
I wish I knew then what I know right now. When my parents split, that's when it shook my ground. No source of strength.
Good morning, Tampa Bay, and welcome to Tampa's only exclusive mixed martial arts radio show, Pull No Punches Radio, powered by the Enlisted 9 Fight Company here on WTAN and the Tan Talk Radio Network. Dan O'Brien, Jay Pagliaro with you for the next hour to discuss all things mixed martial arts, specifically the UFC 167 main event debacle, amongst other topics. We got a lot on the plate. First and foremost, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for tuning in this week to join us for our third show here on the program. Big thanks to Mr. Bill, the technical director, driving the Pull No Punches bus, as he does every Saturday morning, keeping us on the air, keeping us sounding sharp, and keeping us rocking and rolling like only we do here on Pull No Punches Radio. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome my co-host today, Dan O'Brien, the usual Dan O'Brien, not Staff Sergeant Dan O'Brien, because I did that intro and I was wrong about that. Dan, real quick, what exactly is your rank? Because I screwed that up all the time, and then it's you're not a staff sergeant. You're much higher up the ranks than that.
Jay, I serve as a command sergeant major in the Army, and also as an MMA analyst with you, as well as several other things. But yeah, it's a senior position in the United States Army.
So I'm going to fix that up here next week. We'll get that sharp and ready to go.
Hey, I'm not offended by that at all. This isn't an Army show. This is a mixed martial arts show, so we're good to go.
Fair enough. But, hey, speaking of things not to be offended by, we certainly welcome your phone calls here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Number to call if you are interested in jumping on board to discuss anything mixed martial arts with Dan or I is, I had the number here and I lost it. Bill, what's the number, bud?
727-441-3000, 727-441-3000, or toll free 1-866-826-1340.
That's why we pay him the big bucks. Bill driving the bus, keeping us sounding good. So give us a call, discuss all things MMA and whatever's on your mind. Now, obviously the big topic of this week, as we discussed last week, UFC's 20th anniversary show, UFC 167 has come, it has passed. And let me tell you, Dan, I got to say this because, frankly, 167 events, 20 years in the UFC was a monumental night. It's forever going to be marred, however, but by what I want to call the absolute most horrific garbage decision I have ever seen in my life. This isn't a knock on George St. Pierre, okay? I know people have accused us on the Enlisted 9 Facebook page of being haters, of wishing George St. Pierre to lose. It has nothing to do with that. From an unbiased perspective, because I'm going to admit, Dan, I've had Johnny Hendricks co-host Pull No Punches Radio with me on several different occasions. Johnny Hendricks actually, gave a shout out to Pull No Punches after he beat Fitch. So yes, there is some bias there. However, taking the bias out of it and being a completely unbiased commentator, which is what I am, to me there is no conceivable way whatsoever George St. Pierre won that fight. At absolute best, it was 3-2 Hendricks is how I had it scored. And that's if you give the third round the GSP. To me, the only round GSP conclusively won was the fifth. And you watch that fight from top to bottom. Hendricks landed the better shots, and he had more takedowns. He did more with his takedowns. How in the hell did GSP win that fight? I'm still to this day, it's been a week, and I still can't wrap my mind around it.
Are you asking me, Jay?
Absolutely. Absolutely. How did GSP win that fight? I mean, besides the judges being, I'd call them inept, but I think enough people would have got that right. I mean, what were these judges watching? Were they watching tap dancing? Were they staring at Brittany Palmer's butt? What were they doing? Because they clearly weren't watching the same fight I was.
Well, Jay, I went back. I watched the fight about 11 times just to make sure that I would have a unbiased opinion as well. And I'll tell you right now, before I even start talking, George St. Pierre, he's going to go down as one of the top 5 of all time for what he has brought to the octagon over the last 7 years and before, but in this run. But I will tell you, I mean, they judge that out there at the Nevada Athletic State Commission. They judge it on 4 areas, and we all know that. And I think Hendricks pretty much did the overwhelming amount of damage. He obviously did more with his takedowns, like you said. And it's very hard to sit here and argue something when we weren't sitting there. But from afar, when you're watching the fight, it clearly was Johnny Hendricks. You could look at the damage that was done. And there's always been the argument that, as a champion, you have to basically, dethrone the champion. And I thought he did that overwhelmingly. I'm hoping people will call in and we can open up this debate a little bit further. But as far as the punching power, the decisive octagon control and everything else, I don't think George St. Pierre had an answer for anything Johnny Hendricks was doing.
Absolutely. Not even close. And I mean, listen, yes, you can look at CompuStrike and say that George St. Pierre had 21 more strikes. But, you look at the strikes that Hendricks was landing versus the strikes George St. Pierre was landing. I mean, you're talking to under 20. Now, if it had been a 50, 60-point differential in strikes, maybe we have an argument. But GSP lands 20 more strikes, but what were they doing? You look at the two faces. Hendricks looked like he could have gone another 3 rounds. George St. Pierre looked like mincemeat. And don't give me this garbage I'm hearing online, well, George St. Pierre bruises easily. That's ridiculous. That's nonsensical. And then you look at the takedowns. I want to say Hendricks, I want to say it was 5-4 Hendricks in terms of takedowns, but you look at the takedowns that happened. St. Pierre scored a takedown. Hendricks was quickly back to his feet. Yet Hendricks was scoring a takedown. That's the longest I've ever seen George St. Pierre on his back. Hendricks took him down and kept him down. He controlled half the second round on top of St. Pierre. I mean, again, it's like you alluded to. It's easy for us to sit here and say, you know what, we can't fully judge because we weren't there. We were from long distance. We were watching on pay-per-view. But I mean, it doesn't resonate with me at all. It just doesn't resonate with me just from this perspective of how George St. Pierre could have possibly won that fight. And I'll tell you right now. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, you look at it, and all the excuses are out there. You had people saying that Hendricks tapped in the first round, and then you had other people saying that, John Hendricks got outstruck. But the thing about it is people need to understand, when you're throwing left jabs, and I mean, don't get me wrong, St. Pierre's stand-up did look pretty decent. It's just that none of those punches had any effect whatsoever. Johnny Hendricks, after the fight, looked like he was out with us at Hooters eating afterwards. It didn't even look like he went through a 5-round war with George St. Pierre. So I think what Dana White was so upset about is, in my personal opinion, is that Nevada is doing what to MMA what they did to boxing. And we got to get this right, because in all these other states, we don't see quite the difference. I mean, we don't see quite the outcome as we do in Vegas. Sometimes they're just so far off that I think the fans go out scratching their heads, and I think they lose confidence in the system. They want to blame it on the UFC, but people need to understand that's totally a neutral organization outside the UFC, and you heard that through Dana White's comments.
Absolutely, and you guys are blaming. A lot of people are blaming Dana White. They're blaming George St. Pierre, who are the wrong people to blame. Dana White, if you've seen anything over the last week, you would see that Dana White was by no means happy with that fight. And let me tell you, Dana White, there was no bias there. If Dana White was being biased, he'd have said George St. Pierre would have won the fight. He would have argued GSP won the fight because GSP is one of his cash cows. GSP makes the UFC a ton of money. And you just look at the gate, Dan. The gate was the second highest gate in MMA history, or in UFC history, only behind Silva Sonnen, too. So there's obviously no bias here. What Dana White realizes, though, is that this was a robbery. This was a garbage decision by the judges, and frankly, these are becoming entirely too frequent. I mean, I'll put this bluntly. Okay, I watched, and you brought up a point. To be the champ, you got to beat the champ. Okay, I'll throw 3 fights out there where the champion was dethroned, and yet the challenger did far less to win the fight than Johnny Hendricks did against George St. Pierre. Number one was Benson Henderson versus Frankie Edgar. Number two was Frankie Edgar versus B.J. Penn. And number three was a fight I was at personally, Bellator 106, Michael Chandler, Eddie Alvarez. Those three bouts had title changes. And let me tell you, all three of them had, the Alvarez, Penn, and, Alvarez, Edgar, and Henderson did far less in those fights than Johnny Hendricks did against George St. Pierre. So this conclusiveness of the judges, it just becomes too and too frequent. And it seems like every event now, Dan, there's one or two fights on the card that the judges just whiff miserably on. And we're not talking bad. We're not talking, a close 48-47 fight that could have gone either way. Those happen. But we're seeing just horrendous whiffs. This, Lorenz Larkin versus Francis Carmine. Hell, one could argue the Gustafsson Jones fight in Toronto. I mean, it's just what needs to be done, in your opinion, and I've got mine, but I want yours first. What needs to be done to fix this problem? Because it seems to be almost a pandemic. And frankly, for those that claim don't leave it in the hands of the judges, that's ridiculous because as far as I'm concerned, you can't say don't leave it in the hands of the judges. It's becoming tougher and tougher to finish people nowadays because more and more people are learning defense. More and more people are tougher. I mean, this is a new breed of fighter we're seeing where finishes aren't always necessary and aren't always possible. And frankly, Dan, before I kick it over to you, a man should not be robbed or a woman should not be robbed of their win bonus, their purse, and their career progression because these judges fall asleep at the wheel. What are your thoughts on what needs fixed? What needs to be done to fix this problem?
I'll say I don't know really what the answer is because you see it just outside of Vegas also. You see it a little bit more in Vegas with their athletic state commission, but you see it across the board. But, I could see the Jones-Gustafsson fight. I mean, we had this debate about 20 hours probably worth already. So, but I thought that was a lot closer than the Hendricks-St. Pierre fight was. But, again, I don't know if you can do anything about it. I think what it comes down to is, as the sport grows, you're going to get more and more people that come in there, and they're going to have more expertise in the judging arena. But I just don't see it ever going away. And as this sport gets more and more competitive, it makes it just that much harder to judge. But I also think that a lot of judges come in with the mindset, if you got like St. Pierre winning so many fights over 7 years, you already have formed a bias that it's not going to be that close. So I think maybe in their own minds, they're not neutral, and sometimes that has something to do with it, or they're worried about what Dana White might say, or they're worried about, other promotions and stuff that they might have to say about the judges. Because, the judges do get quite a bit of criticism. And I'll tell you, I have judged tournaments that, judging and being a referee is not an easy task. But at the same time, you have to be able to use common sense. And when somebody's face basically looks totally wrecked, and I don't want to just say that that's what the sport's about, because for the most part, they don't come out that way. But in this particular case, Johnny Hendricks, that we're talking about, clearly had the decisive striking advantage in this fight. And I just don't know how anybody could get that, confused by looking at, you got to be able to look at something and realize what's taking place. And that's where I have a hard time, trying to figure out what is going on. And I see Dana White had the same frustration. We all do. But, I just don't know that you can fix it, overnight. I think it's just something that comes with experience along the way.
Here's my solution. Here's my solution in a nutshell, Dan. And I think you summed it up very well. It may be tough. It may be something that never gets fixed. Here's my solution 101, though. Get rid of these boxing judges. Get rid of these people that don't understand the sport and bring in former pro fighters, people that have been inside the cage, people that have been, even if they didn't fight inside the octagon, sign these former professional fighters who have retired to judge these fights. They get it. There's a reason Big John McCarthy and Herb Dean are two of the best referees in the business, because they've been in the trenches. They know what it's like to fight professionally. If you do this with judges, and believe me, this is a two-pronged situation. For the former pro fighters like Ken Shamrock, like Dan Severn, whomever, you can throw the laundry list of guys down the name, For these former pro fighters who have, their careers are over and they're trying to think of life thereafter, this keeps them involved with the sport, and they're going to know they're going to know what's proper damage and what's not. They're going to know that George St. Pierre may have landed 160 strikes to Johnny Hendricks' 141, but they're also going to know that of the 141 strikes that Johnny Hendricks landed, they were double the impact of George St. Pierre's 160. They're going to know that Johnny Hendricks had longer takedown. His takedowns lasted longer than St. Pierre's. He had longer time on top than St. Pierre did. They're going to know these fine intricacies that somebody who's never been in their hat isn't going to know. And, I mean, to me, that's the clearest and cleanest fix you could possibly get is put these former pro fighters in there. And New Jersey has it with Ricardo Almeida. They've got him as a judge. They need to follow this suit. They need to follow suit and put pro fighters. And it's not perfect. I mean, listen, Dan, there are fights, no matter what. You could have Tank Abbott, Hoist Gracie, Ken Shamrock, Paul Barnes, every member of UFC 1 judging. And there's going to be fights that the audience doesn't agree with. That's the nature of the beast. But it'll eliminate these just ridiculous judging calls, I think, that, seem to be far too frequent, I should say, for my liking.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. And then also you got to realize in that fight, if you go back and watch it, George St. Pierre was clearly stunned and dazed in 4 of the 5 rounds. So that should have told you right there that the fight had definitely been swaying in Hendricks' favor the whole time. I mean, and Hendricks was never rocked or even stumbled one bit during the whole fight. So bringing in the former fighters to be referees, I'm sure that would have a good, it'd be a good solution. But I still don't know that that's the answer overall. But, I mean, I would be more than welcome to see it just to see how it went.
Absolutely. And for those of you that want to chime in, I mean, if you disagree with us, feel free to tell us. Our number to call here at the Tan Talk Radio Network, WTIN, is 727-441-3000. Once again, that's 727-441-3000, or toll free at 866-826-1340. Call us, jump on board, tell Mr. Bill, the man behind the board, you want to talk to us and tell us we're crazy. I've been called far worse, Dan. I've been called far worse, including at Buffalo Wild Wings last Saturday when I was there watching the fights and they saw my reaction. I was told in minimum, you're passionate about this sport, ain't you? Just a tad bit. But I was up and did you see Phil Davis's response to Gustafson's loss to Jones, the referee? It was on YouTube. I don't know if you got to see that or not, but mine was a little bit more vulgar, but quite a bit similar to that.
Yeah, this sport can definitely get the best of you, can't it, Jay?
Oh my God, you know as much as anybody, dude. You know as much as anybody. It's like I'll just put it this way: I wasn't winning too many Father of the Year awards last Saturday night, and my kid was there. I scared the crap out of him. My 1-year-old son, he was all upset because he thought I was mad at him, and I'm like, his mom had to tell him, no, Daddy's friend lost. He's upset about that. So yeah, it certainly brings out the best of the emotions in you. That's for sure. That's for sure.
Hey, so you know what, Jerry? Let's talk a little bit about Rashad's resurgence. What do you think about him going on? I talked to his brother Lance on Facebook, and I'll tell you what, I think he's shaping up right now. Looks like he's got his game together. I don't know that KO, took the fight as serious as he probably should have, but hey, the bottom line, I would tell you, I think Rashad's back.
Oh yeah, I mean, and to be honest with you, the only thing I disagree with what you said there is I think with Rashad being, I don't think he was ever gone. To be honest with you, yeah, he had to fight with Jones. It didn't go his way, which prior to the Belfort fight was the toughest challenge Jones had yet. But, I mean, the reality is, yeah, Rashad had a couple of off fights. The fight against Nogueira was an off fight. He's back. He's healthy. His mind is in it. And, frankly, a 100% healthy Rashad Evans is as dangerous of a fighter as there is at 205 pounds. I mean, he took Chael Sonnen down, which is a tough task to begin with. The minute that fight hit the ground, it was over. And I'm as big of a Chael Sonnen fan as there is, Dan. I mean, that guy, outside of Colton Smith, is my favorite fighter in the UFC, okay? I mean, I'm a big Chael mark. That fight was over, though. The second it hit the ground, Chael had no answer for Rashad's quickness. He had no answer for his speed. And I think that fight proved 2 things. Number one, that Rashad is a contender at 205 pounds. And I'd like to see this signed, sealed, and delivered right now. I want to see Rashad Evans versus Dan Cormier. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think this proves number 2 thing, that Chael Sonnen should be down at 185 pounds. This man has no, in my opinion, with due respect to him, has no spot at 205. He's not a 205er. He's dominant at 185. If you look at his record, most of his losses in the UFC came at 205. To me, it's time for him to move down and, go back to his natural weight class.
Oh, absolutely. When you think about that whole fight, I personally think Chael Sonnen is a 185er. You know that. We've talked this many and many a times. The great thing about Chael Sonnen, though, is he will take any fight at any time, and he is a fan favorite, as you know. I mean, no one would have thought this guy would have ever been able to have the dominant force that he does in the UFC and be able to sell gates the way he does. So I applaud him for his courage, tenacity, and everything else that he brings to the octagon. But 185 is where he's got to be. And he even made mention in the post-fight conference that there's just some things that he just cannot do at 205. Because, 205, Rashad's a 230 guy, 240 guy walking around. So, there's a certain positions that you're able to evade or escape at 185 that you're unable to do at 205. And a lot of guys who don't really know the sport, they don't understand the significance of that 15 pounds or that 20 pounds and the difference that it makes in the octagon. But, hey, applaud Chael for what he does. Great commentator. Him and Rashad, as you know, they're great buddies. They do a great job for this sport, announcing and everything else. So I'm glad that they did go in there and put the gloves on. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, he's an 85er. And, Rashad is a pure, legit 205er, as we know, even though he fought heavyweight before. But him at 205, other than John Jones, I just don't think there's anybody out there that has an answer for Rashad right now.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I include Dan Cormier in that mix. I don't think Dan Cormier has the speed to keep up, and I think it's the nice thing about it is, though, as we've seen Rashad resurgence, this proves that the 208, 205-pound weight class, which as of 12 months ago was considered cleaned out, it proves that the talent is there. There's new talent. I mean, Big Gustafsson gained more, I think, by losing that fight than he would have by winning it. You know what I mean? He proved that he's one of the top 2 to 3 fighters at 205 pounds in the sport. Then there's the killer, Glover Teixeira. He's next in line. I mean, whenever that was supposed to be in February, I believe, but that's been pushed back. So you got Glover Teixeira, you've got Rashad Evans. I mean, you've got this Jimmy Manoa coming up the ranks. I mean, there's talent to be had at 205 pounds. I mean, Phil Davis, Cormier. I mean, the division is quickly growing bigger and bigger by the day. And I think, like you said, though, Rashad Evans, I mean, it's clear. He already knows he holds a win over Phil Davis. I mean, he just dominated Sonnen. Went on. This guy is, he's a force to be reckoned with. And I have a hunch that you may not have seen the last between him and John Jones by any stretch of the imagination. But that's assuming Jones gets past Teixeira. And, if he does, is he going to be able to get past Gustafsson a second time? A lot of questions to be answered there at 205 pounds.
Well, if you noticed that every fight for John Jones seems to be getting a little bit more difficult. And I think when he gets in there with Teixeira, I think he's going to take it straight to him, and I think John Jones needs to realize that guy's not going to back down. You saw that in the Bader fight. I mean, he got a little rocked, but he was able to answer. And I don't think John Jones hits harder than Ryan Bader in the one-punch knockout department. I think John Jones puts a lot more punches together, a lot more technical. But I think that Teixeira brings something to the table, and I would, if it were me after talking to Teixeira out of Fort Campbell, I wouldn't take that fight light at all.
No, and I've said, and you can vouch for this, Dan, I've said on my Facebook page quite a few times, I think Glover Teixeira is going to be the one that dethrones Jones. I've been saying that for 4 or 5 months now, and I'm not relenting in that. I think that John Jones, especially you look at his fight with Belfort, you look at his fight with Gustafsson, he showed some flaws. He showed some weaknesses. He showed some kinks in the armor. I think Glover Teixeira, not necessarily, he doesn't excel at anything, in my opinion. He's not, doesn't have one strength, but he does everything so fluidly. I mean, he's good in grappling. He's good in jiu-jitsu. He's got just ridiculous striking. To me, that is a very, very dangerous matchup for John Jones. And I think he's the one that's going to take the belt. I think when him and Jones inevitably fight, I think that Jones' run at 205 pounds as a champ for now is going to be over.
Oh, yeah. Jones' last couple fights have gone the distance. He's put a lot of wear and tear on that body. It's a big cut for him, too. I think it's a 245 cut to 05. So, a lot of that plays into it. Your body doesn't always recover the same way. And I think Teixeira brings something severe to the table. And I'm very interested to see that fight. I know a lot of fans out there not 100% happy with the Gustafsson not getting a rematch, but I understand. because to be honest with you, no one really thought Gustafsson was going to come in there and, have a great fight like he did. So I understand where the fans come in and they have a lot of, a lot of issues with that. But hey, he sure has earned it, and he's trained really hard. He's fought some big guys and probably more than Gustafsson up to this point. So I look forward to it. And then I think right after that, depending on the outcome, you see Gustafsson come back in, or you're going to see Rashad come in. It depends on the matchmakers at that time and what's available out there.
727-441-3000, your telephone number to call, or 866-826-1340. You're listening to Pull No Punches Radio here on the Tan Talk Radio Network, WTAN, and, of course, on TuneIn Radio. Jay Pagliaro, Dan O'Brien, Mr. Bill, the driver of the bus behind the board, keeping us on the air and keeping us sounding stellar as always. But, Dan, I know one person who, really, like you said, Rashad took a big step forward in reassessing himself as one of the top 205-pounders in the sport, revitalized his career, so to speak. Him being back, another one who proved he's back in tenfold is Robbie Lawler, Ruthless Robbie. I mean, this is a guy, give you a past history for those of you that are relatively new to the UFC and MMA game. Robbie Lawler broke into the sport back in 2002, 2003 as a 21-year-old and was just gaining rave reviews for his ridiculous knockout power, his speed, his power. The guy seemed to be the full package. Everybody stated and felt that this kid was the future at 170 pounds. Unfortunately, he had a couple of setbacks, point A, point B, lost to Pete Spratt, wound up losing to Nick Diaz, getting choked out by the late Evan Tanner, wound up getting released by the UFC, bounced around in other promotions, most notably Strikeforce and Elite XC, where he had a couple of just phenomenal fights with Scott Smith. But, there was something that seemingly was missing with Robbie Lawler. And maybe it was him fighting at 185 pounds, as you mentioned, that weight differential being a big thing. Lawler drops down to 170, comes back to the UFC, and he's been flawless so far. I mean, he's been flawless. He knocks out Josh Koscheck. He knocks out the tough Bobby Volker. And this win, perhaps his best in his career, defeats Rory McDonald emphatically. Now, granted, it was a decision. It was called a split decision, but realistically speaking, I mean, that was another case that judges, in my opinion, falling asleep at the wheel. Robbie Lawler won that fight clearly by unanimous decision, even though the judges saw it another way. But again, Ruthless Robbie, back in a big-time way, defeats the kid that everybody thought is the future at 170 pounds. What's next for Ruthless Robbie in your book there, Dan? I mean, I'd have to say, he's got to be pretty close to a title shot now.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with this George St. Pierre outcome of this decision that was announced the night after the fight. But I think Lawler, I mean, hey, he's come alive, and he's exciting to watch. The fans are getting back in his corner again. So I don't know. It would be nice to see a couple more good fights there, but when you start thinking about it, there's not a laundry list there very long where he does get that shot. I think he's proven it. And, he's been like a lot of those other fighters. He had that little gap in between that he fell off a little bit, but it happens to all those young fighters that come up. I'm not going to sit here and name names, but you know who they are. But, hey, let's just get behind Lawler. I think he's a good ambassador for the sport. I think he's got everything going in the right direction right now, and I'm proud of the guy. I think he's done a great job, and he's representing the UFC very well at 170.
And Lawler really one of the last of that second generation of guys. You know what I mean by the second generation? There was the UFC, the beginning. Then there was that second generation, the golden years, I like to call them, with guys like, Lawler and obviously much higher up the card, guys like Couture, Liddell, Franklin, the late Tanner. I mean, Lawler really one of the last of that second generation of guys. It's just refreshing. It's refreshing to me to see this kid who, like I said, once upon a time had so much hype surrounding him, didn't quite develop at the time. It's nice to see him finally develop into what everybody thought he was going to be all along. And let me tell you, beating Rory McDonald is no easy task. I mean, this is really, we've seen McDonald defeated even once before in the UFC. It was against Carlos Condit in a fight to where he was kicking Condit's rear end for 3 rounds and wound up getting hurt and losing as a result. That is really the first time, in my opinion, we've seen Rory McDonald dominated. And, that speaks volumes of Lawler's talent and where he's at now in his career. I'll put it this way. Again, 170 pounds, all depends upon what happens to George St. Pierre. Certain schmuck websites, TMZ, are reporting that he's retiring because of baby mama drama and dad dying drama, which just sickens me. TMZ stick to sticking your nose up Kim Kardashian's rear end. That's where you're better out. Stay out of MMA. But, regardless of whatever George St. Pierre is going to do, seems like he's leaning towards retirement. It still opens up a wide variety of opportunities at 170 pounds because there are so many names that are quickly coming up the ranks there. I mean, you've got Lawler. Obviously, you can't help but say Johnny Hendricks if GSP does vacate the belt. Johnny Hendricks has to be in the running for, if not to get the belt, at least a chance to win it again, and a fight against somebody. I mean, there's Carlos Condit there. There's still McDonald, even though he lost. Matt Brown, talk about a career resurgence there. Woodley, Tyrone Woodley. There's just so many names that are floating around at 170 pounds that really it's wide open at this point. If GSP walks away, I got to believe it's highly wide open.
It's going to be very hard to distinguish who's going to, who's going to be able to get that opportunity and seize that moment. And because you mentioned Woodley, okay, I think Koscheck's out of there now for a while. I think McDonald's still going to get another crack down the road at it. As we all know, he's the up-and-comer, he's the future of MMA, at least everybody's titled as such. But I think Lawler right now, it's his time. And I think Woodley's a good fight for coming over from the Strike Force camps. I think it was there. So I couldn't tell you, but, who's going to get that shot. But I am, in my personal opinion, I'm thinking it's Johnny Hendricks, Carlos Condit, if George St. Pierre walks away.
I think it's a fair assessment. I think, or if I'll say I agree with that. It's going to be Hendricks Condit too, or I don't want to overrule them because, let's be honest, so many people have looked past him in his last 5-6 fights, and if he's proven us wrong, I'm just going to say the winner of Condit versus Matt Brown versus Johnny Hendricks is a fair fight. I think it's a fair fight. Lawler can, there's somebody, put him in there with Woodley, put him in there with Woodley and, see who gets the winner of that gets the winner of this trifecta tournament, perhaps. That's endless possibilities. But bigger things that aren't endless, my opinion, and I'm going to give another one here. All right, and speaking, it's involving UFC 167. It's involving the fight game as a whole. Now, I know a lot of fans, Dan, and we've seen it blow up on the Enlisted 9 fight page this week over a missed weight cut on The Ultimate Fighter, which we saw Anthony Sharkbait Gutierrez, one of the semifinalists, miss weight, wound up getting kicked off the show. We see Davey Grant make the men's finale at 135 pounds on the show by default, by forfeit. This sport we mentioned earlier brings out the highest of emotions in people. And I get that. Very few, I should say, are more emotional about this sport than I am from a fan's perspective. I've got vested interest in it. I've been following it from the beginning. I do it for a living, with this show and with my other show in Phoenix, my other business ventures. That being said, there's, to me, a right way and a wrong way to conduct yourself as a fan. And I see far too many people online using vulgar terms to refer to these fighters. I'm not going to say I'm on air because, again, FCC violations, but you guys can figure out what I'm talking about. Questioning the manhood or the toughness of these guys. Questioning, whether they could beat these guys themselves, which is laughable because let me tell you, the worst fighter in the UFC would beat the crap out of a Joe Schmo any day in a week 5 times out of 5. What really chaps me, though, Dan, is when people applaud injuries. I saw many people applauding GSP getting hurt, getting beat up in a fight, that he was going to retire because of injuries. And when this TMZ story came out about his dad, and the baby, just kicking sand in the man's face, and then applauding that. What kind of humanity do we live in? And this, it's moving on. Another case in point last night, it ain't MMA related, but I'm on Facebook when Derrick Rose of the Chicago Bulls suffered another knee injury. People applauding that. What's wrong with people? Well, what the hell is wrong with humanity as a whole to where we're going to cheer another man's misfortune? Are we that twisted, sick, and morbid as a society to where injuries appeal to us? Look, these gentlemen, whether they fight in the UFC, play in the NBA, play in the NFL, whatever, they put their shoes on the same 2 feet as we do. They're all somebody. These people are somebody's husband, somebody's dad, somebody's brother or sister. They're humans at the end of the day. It just sickens me to see members of the fan base applaud when somebody gets hurt. It's sickening. It's maybe I was raised in a different generation, Dan. Maybe I was raised by a different set of rules. You don't kick somebody when they're down. You don't root for somebody when they get hurt. It's vile.
Oh, yes, Jay. I agree with you. You see it all the time. I mean, I call them the fanatics. You know, they have always, you know, something to say about an injury and all the other things. It's really unfortunate. These guys put their whole life into this. I mean, they've invested their time. Sure, the money's great for some athletes, but not for all. But nobody wishes on anybody to get hurt to where it's like you said in the NBA or football. These are kids that, or even adults now, depending on their age, that have put their whole soul into this, and you know they just trying to do the best they can. And granted, there are some sports out there that I can see where the fans are happy because of the way they treat the fans. You know, a lot of this is caused by the way athletes treat the fans. You know, when they have the opportunity to meet them and stuff like that. So I think there's that animosity that's built along the way. But I just do not agree with the people sit there like Tom Brady, for instance, when he goes down, everybody gets happy because at the end of the day, it is a sport. And you hear about all these fans and everybody else, you know, all these tragedies that happen at the stadiums. It's just horrible. But you're seeing it even in Little League now. You're seeing it at high school football games. I mean, people can't even go to a sports game without somebody getting injured or losing their life or something along that lines. Has it really gotten that bad in society that it's no longer a sport? It's like, I don't know. I can't describe it. I think it's disgusting, to be honest with you. I love watching fights. I love watching competitive fights. But the thing is, even in the mixed martial arts arena, when somebody gets hurt, what does a mixed martial artist do? The winner, immediately, he's not jumping around for more than like 3 seconds when he realizes the guy's hurt. He runs over there and makes sure he's okay. And, you know, that's kind of like the way I was brought up in sport. If you hurt somebody, you know, and then you really realize the person's hurt, then your job is to go over there and offer up that, you know, that, I don't know what you would call it, that sportsmanship or that ability to reunite with that guy and respect him because he was your opponent that day, not to sit there and belittle him and berate him in front of all these people.
Exactly, and I couldn't have said it better. I participated in sports, you know, up through my high school years. You know, I wrestled, I played football, and let me tell you, when it 6 minutes on the mat, you better darn sure believe that I was going to slam the person or take him down as hard as I could. Playing football, I played linebacker. My goal was to smash the guy I was playing against as hard as I possibly can, to knock him down, to put him down and on his butt. Granted, my hope was to get back up, but my goal was to put him down, not to injure him. There were a few times, Dan, I participated in meets. I participated in football games where I'd hit somebody, they didn't get back up right away. They wound up getting hurt. The wind knocked out of them, broken ribs. You know, unfortunately, in one meet, dude separated his shoulder. As soon as it happened, I mean, as a human being, that's where the human kicks in. I felt about an inch tall. I felt like garbage. You know, I wound up going over afterwards, and, you know, after everything was over, I was constantly checking on the guy. We've seen it in MMA a couple weeks ago at Bellator 107, I believe it was. Tom DeBlas, UFC vet, knocked Jason Lambert out, flush, cold. Literally after a punch was thrown, DeBlas didn't even celebrate. Lambert got knocked out that violently. He immediately went down and was like helping Lambert out. We've seen it with Glover Teixeira. He choked out Kyle Kingsbury in his UFC debut and immediately was there rubbing his chest to sort of revive him. I mean, that's what this sport is all about. At the end of the day, there's a way to be a sportsman. And I think a lot of these people that cheer the demise of these players' injuries are idiots that never did anything in life themselves, that their highlight of their career was being some gym class hero or some schmuck that plays a damn video game that thinks, you know what, that's my career, that's what sports is all about. These people that cheer and applaud injuries, to me, I don't discriminate against everybody. Everybody deserves to be a right to be a paying customer. Those people should be escorted out. It's sickening. It makes me vile. And, you know, it makes me just want to vomit to see these people act like this because it's not human, Dan. It's not human at all. It's crap I wouldn't put up with from my 1-year-old son or my 11-year-old daughter. I mean, but you see these grown adults who have had one too many beers in them, and all of a sudden, oh, that's great, he broke his arm, phenomenal. It ain't phenomenal because you know what? That's taking their livelihood away from them. And I was at actually an MMA event, ring announcing, mutual friend of ours, mutual friend of Colton and mine. I just forgot his name. Great brain fart, but Elder Ramos. Was at a fight. I rung announced a fight with Elder Ramos. He threw a high kick and knocked his opponent unconscious. I mean, to the point to where the guy was convulsing in the ring. Okay, it was one of the worst knockouts I've ever seen in my life. I heard people in the front row, and I'm not going to use the terms they were you know, they were saying, but some of the cleaner things was, hey, let's call the Undertaker. Oh, that chump's dead, and laughing about it. I went over to him and I said, how would you like if you were in his shoes? Would you be cheering? If that was your brother, would you be cheering? If that was your dad, your friend, your whatever, the guy had nothing to say about it. You know, make these people realize the error of their ways, because at the end of the day, I think they forget at the end of it that these are human beings first and foremost. These are people that live real lives. You know, they go home to the same problems and trials and tribulations we have, but it's magnified because, let's be honest, Dan, especially in MMA, as the sport continues to grow in the mainstream mind, these fighters are put under a huge microscope. Even Colton, our co-host, you know, I mean, people still, to this day, if I bring up the name Colton Smith, and you've seen it on my Facebook wall, people still bring up what happened on Top 16 in his fight with Jesse Barrett. I mean, these guys are under a huge microscope that and it's not easy. It's not easy at all being under a microscope where your every move is critiqued with a fine-tooth comb. It's not easy being criticized like George St. Pierre, who has been nothing but a class act and an ambassador of the sport. It's not easy, you know, for guys like him to go on Twitter and see, you know, a laundry list of people calling him a coward or a wimp, or, you know, and it's not always that clean. Trust me, it's just people don't realize the difficulty that these professional athletes are under, and mixed martial artists fall under that scope.
Oh, yes. I mean, as you know, I pretty much live with Colton on a daily basis out here, so I know Colton Smith. I mean, you know, it's just the way it is. It's a part of the business. It's part of the criticism that comes with it. But if you actually met Colton Smith or even any of these other fighters, I mean, for the most part, I would say MMA fighters are probably the most approachable athletes that are out there. Nothing like going to MMA fight and running into somebody and seeing people sign autographs for 4 or 5 hours at a time, unlike NASCAR and football where the people just want to run away from you. So, you know, hey, everybody's going to form their opinions. I know what's really going on. You know, as you know, I'm here all the time, and I'm behind my little buddy there 100%. And I wish only the best for him, and he's a great professional. He's a great soldier. He's a great fighter, and that's about where I'll leave it at that. But as far as getting back to your other point, as far as the fans about wishing the injuries on people and everything else, you know, I think we've all been guilty once in our life to where you're pulling for that football team to get into the playoffs, and you're like, oh, if he just got, you know, taken out of the game or whatever. But I've never, like, ever said that I want somebody to get their leg shattered or to get their neck broken or something along those lines, because, you know, the bottom line is there's still some kind of professionalism that comes with even being a fan and, you know, representing your team or whatever. So, I don't know, I get kind of bent out of shape about it, the way people act, or like when these fighters actually do knock somebody out and everybody's cheering it. Yeah, you cheer it when you see the fighter get back up on the chair or up on the stool because, hey, the bottom line is, like you said, the goal is to do harm to your opponent. But you are not trying to physically hurt him in a way to where he cannot still continue his career. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of my perspective on it. And I think at the end of the day, the reason our sport is so tight because we sit in the back in the locker rooms with these fighters, and you're friends with them 6 months, you know, ago when you were sitting back there in Vegas in the back at the MGM talking to everybody, and then you got to fight the guy the next time around, no different than like Chael and Rashad. But the thing about it is, at the end of the day, Chael and Rashad are probably best friends again and been on the phone ever since that fight. So, you know, I think people miss the boat that these guys are not enemies. They are just enemies for that fight, trying to sell that fight.
Absolutely. It's a business sense. I mean, listen, and when you're talking MMA, we'll compare it to football. When I'm just throwing a name out there, using the Tampa Bay, version. When John Abraham smashes into Mike Glennon, okay, or when last year when Doug Martin was with the Bucs, and opposing defenses were hitting them, they weren't hitting them. They're buddies. It's competition at the end of the day. And I'm not going to say all these guys are the best of friends. There are a lot of cases where these guys get in there and they do legitimately dislike each other. But 90% of the time, it's nothing more than competition. Like when you play football, when you wrestle. I wrestled against plenty of friends. I played football against plenty of friends. I hit them just as hard as, I would hit somebody I didn't know. Wrestling. I mean, I wrestled one of my best friends. I wrestled my cousin. And I told him before the meet happened, I said, look, put it aside. we're not related for 15 minutes. You know, I love you. I'm going to love you before. I'm going to love you after. I'm going to go out there and kick your ass for the 6 minutes we're on the mat. You know what I mean? That's and I hope if you do the same to me, if you don't give me the same treatment and try to kick mine, I'm going to kick it again afterwards. That's all it is. You know, I mean, there's love and admiration for each other, and there's a brotherhood to this sport and sisterhood that, you know, unless you're part of it in some capacity, you can't understand. But end of the day, that's what it is. It's a competition. It's a camaraderie, but it's a competition. And, you know, that's, you know, basically what the sport is. That's what MMA is all about. And I think a lot of people, like you said, Dan, lose track of that. Telephone number to call. We got about 10 minutes left. 727-441-3000 or toll free 866-826-1340. Real quick, couple more topics I want to discuss because we're getting ready to wrap up the show. Had some business to E9 I'd like to talk about beforehand, but talk a little bit about it briefly, though, the weight cut issues. We saw it on top. Anthony Gutierrez misses weight in his semifinal fight against Davey Grant, gives Grant a pass to the finale. We saw our buddy Cody Bollinger miss weight earlier this season. Weight cutting, one of those things, Dan, that I think this is an interesting topic to bring up because, you know, that's another case scenario. I mean, it also seems to be an issue that hits the sport hard. You know, we see people miss weight. My opinion, though, in the case of both Gutierrez and Bollinger, what the UFC did is justified. I mean, listen, I'm a friend of Cody Bollinger. I'm a fan of the guys, one of the nicest guys in the sport. One of those people that I have a camaraderie with, that brotherhood with. Same time, the UFC did the right thing by letting him go from his contract. They did the same thing, right thing, by letting Gutierrez go from his contract. End of the day, though, Dan, these guys made mistakes. They realized the error in their ways. I mean, nobody's been more apologetic for what happened on the show than Cody. Okay? These guys deserve a chance to rebuild their career. They made mistakes on the big stage, and to me, they paid the ultimate price. They lost their job in the UFC. Yeah, Cody quickly got hired by World Series of Fighting. I dig that. Nice little contract, good for him. It's not the UFC, Dan. At the end of the day, every fighter's goal is to be in the UFC. And, you know, to me, going to World Series of Fighting is akin to going back in the old day. You remember in the USFL? And you know.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, the World Series of Fighting is the USFL. Yeah, it pays decent. It's not the NFL. That's what the UFC is. It's the NFL of MMA. And both of these guys were right there. They were on the cusp, and they lost it because they missed weight. You can't pay a bigger price than that.
Yes. You know, I agree with you, Jay, 100%. You know, it's such a double standard in the mixed martial arts community. I mean, we all know that, yes, it's unacceptable to make weight, to not make weight. Everybody's well aware of that. There's strict penalties that are enforced, upwards of 20% of the fighter's purse in most promotions. And, you know, the bottom line is, like you said, you lose an opportunity to fight in the biggest promotion in the world when it comes to mixed martial arts. However, being said, I get sick and tired of people sitting there and ridiculing these guys over and over and over again because the bottom line is nobody's hurting more than they are. This is what they've done. They've put their heart and soul into this probably since they were 14, 15, 16 years old, wanted to be a mixed martial artist or some kind of professional athlete, and know now that their choice has cost them the opportunity to be in the biggest show. But my opinion on it is it's no different than these other sports where the substance abuse comes into play or the DUIs or whatever offenses they made, but yet we're still their fans 4 games later when they come back and play on the field. So a great example of that, what is his name, Vaughn Taylor out there, I think his name, or
Vaughn Miller, Broncos. Vaughn Miller.
Yeah, pardon me, Vaughn Miller with the Broncos. I mean, look, now, you know, Broncos are winning, and guess what? Everybody so quickly forgives, you know? So the bottom line is, hey, nobody feels the pain more than those fighters do. We're around these guys all the time, you know, in different ways or whatever, on the phone with them. And the bottom line is, you know, they've made the mistake, they've paid for it, and it's time to move on. It's time to, you know, if you don't want to be their fans, that's fine. But at the same time, then just stay out of it. Let them work their way back up. They've paid the price. It's no different than anybody else who violates any kind of law or whatever. Hey, if you want to sit there and stew in it forever, then hey, whatever. But what the damage has been done, it's time to move on. Cody's a buddy of ours, as you know. All the other guys that it's happened to, we still get behind them and we watch them on the fight cards. They may not be the main event. However, we still cheer for them. And the bottom line is it's time to move on. Weight cuts are horrible. And, you know, the thing is about the show with The Ultimate Fighter, everybody gets to know them in the national media, and, they get to see them on TV. So it's more of a disappointment because they were rallying around that guy that they had been pulling for or whatever during the show. I got all that. But the bottom line is, like I said, now just nail it down one more time, is nobody's hurting more than those two individuals right now because they lost the opportunity to be on the biggest show in the world. And I think that's a good enough statement for me.
Absolutely. Summed it up perfectly. And, frankly, like Dan O'Brien said, your choice, nobody's expecting us to give these guys a free pass. I'm not saying, oh, big deal, he missed weight. It's bad, he missed weight. That's one of the number one responsibilities of a fighter is to make weight. Cody Bollinger did not. Anthony Gutierrez did not. Like Dan said, though, they're the ones that suffered, not you, not me. And I implore anybody that's questioning these people's manhood, and I include several members of the MMA, quote, MMA media, because these people were nothing more than fighter bashers trying to make a name off themselves because of this great sport. But it's a different debate for a different show, and we only have a few minutes left. I'm just going to say this in a nutshell before we talk about some enlisted nine stuff. I dare any of you so-called keyboard warrior badasses who think it's so easy to cut 14 pounds in 12 hours, do it. Do it. Cut 14 pounds in 4 hours or in 12 hours, and then go fight, and then talk about how tough these people are. Until then, stick behind your keyboard, typing up garbage, breaking up a sweat while you do it, and realize these people are professionals for a reason, and you're not. Zip it, because you'll never be it. Anyway, Dan, we've got to wrap up the show by talking a little bit about some stuff going on with Enlisted 9, some big stuff going on. Obviously, you guys got a great album release. You got some new releases. Let's talk quickly about it.
Oh, just real quick, we got a few minutes. If you guys like the show, come on over to Enlisted 9 Fight Company on Facebook, or join us on Twitter, or even at our site at www.enlisted9.com. We got some great shirts. We're an apparel company, and we just released an album. Plan to take it on a tour here in the spring if everything goes right. That's pretty much about it, Jay. Things are going well. We're looking forward to our next fight when we get it scheduled, and we'll see how it goes from there. But again, follow us at Facebook at Enlisted 9 Fight Company, and we would greatly appreciate that.
Absolutely, and be sure to check out their shirts. Believe me, folks, they're well worth the price. You get top quality shirts for a price that you just can't beat. They got a few more coming out. The album, all heartfelt songs. You actually get to hear one of the songs as part of the intro to this show. We've played a couple, over the weeks here at the show during breaks. We'll do one again next week. But
did you want me to play one for your close? A specific one?
Bill. Let's do it.
Well, what's one of the ones that you're looking at? One Nation, Defender of the Free. Which one?
Pick it, Dan. Pick it.
Hey, you got Struggle in the Streets?
Yep, we got that one right here.
Well, let's let everybody hear it. This is one of our issues that we need to get after in America. We have a lot of veterans, and to include not only veterans, but homeless people. This song was written for them, and I think it's something as Americans we need to get after, and we put our heart and soul into this song, and I hope everybody enjoys it.
Absolutely. That being said, we'll wrap it up for this week. Hey, a Pull No Punches logo is coming, brought by Enlisted 9. We'll show it to you here soon. In the meantime, enjoy these tunes. We've certainly enjoyed the opportunity to be on with you this week. For Dan O'Brien, my co-host, for Mr. Bill. Bill, great job as always, brother. We'll talk to you next week. I'm Jay Pagliaro. This has been Pull No Punches Radio, powered by Enlisted 9 Fight Company, and brought to you by the Tan Talk Radio Network. Have a good weekend, everybody.
WTAN, Clearwater, Tampa Bay. WDCF, Dade City, Tampa Bay. WZHR, Zephyr Hills, Tampa Bay. Listen.
Hey, it's time for the Saturday edition of Canada Calling, the news from home for vacationing Canadians throughout Florida. This is Prior Smith speaking from Toronto. It's good to have you with us. Well, Target Stores has found out the hard way. You just don't expand into Canada, open the doors, and expect shoppers to show up in droves. The company expanded here last spring, and they've been opening stores at a rapid rate all across the country. But boy, sales have been disappointing. Third quarter operating loss, $238 million. The problems? Prices are higher than consumers expected, and the product supply chain has been anything but efficient. In Ottawa, the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of an Ontario ban on drugstore chains offering their own house-brand generic drugs.